Hey, Cams Campbell here with a review of this book, Lenin, a Biography by Robert Service. This was brought to my attention by a guest post on Konstantin Kissin's Substack, written by David Volodsko. He was prompted to write it about Lenin because of the fact that he was sacked from his job at the Seattle Times. He was a journalist, and he was sacked because he wrote about the Lenin statue in Seattle and about how ridiculous it was that statues of other dignitaries are being pulled down because of such things as slavery, whereas the statue of Lenin is being celebrated and is being left standing. So, that's what brought me to this book. Now, I am a bit of a scholar about Russian history, however, I forget most things that I've read, and it's a long time since I was at uni. I studied Russian language and literature at St Andrews from 93 through to 98, and there was a history component, but it wasn't very deep. It was just a cursory glance over the whole period of Russian history, right from the Kievan Rus. Based on a book by Ryasanovsky, which I still have. I should maybe read that again at some point. I've read more about Stalin than I have about Lenin, so I was quite excited to read this one. And I enjoyed it. I got a lot from it. And given that I'm now on YouTube talking about books, I think that inspired me to read it a bit more closely. So I've taken lots of notes. I've made Readwise highlights, which I've gone over into my Notion database. And I'm not really sure how to go through them all and review it here because it's text-based and I don't want to go through the whole story of Lenin's life from beginning to end because, you know, you could read the book for that. So what do I want to say about it? Well, it was quite a slow-paced book, and it goes into a lot of Lenin's childhood. In fact, we don't get to the October Revolution until about 3/4 of the way through, something like that. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, it's just an observation. Gives you an idea of how much detail we go into about Lenin's childhood and upbringing. And Service has had access to the archives, which of course were previously locked under communism. There was no way of getting to any of this information until the wall came down and until after that when the archives were opened up. It's made up of a lot of correspondence between Lenin and his family members. He had a few siblings that he wrote to extensively, and it concentrates a lot on the fact that his brother Alexander was hanged for conspiracy, for terrorism, because he was involved in a plot to assassinate Tsar Alexander III. And for that he was hanged. And at that time, Lenin was a young teenager, and according to the author, Lenin never really forgave the Tsar for that atrocity as he saw it. The family were self-starters. Lenin's father was a self-made man. He was a schools inspector. And the whole family lifted themselves up through hard work into the nobility. But they lived among people who were landed gentry or who had been nobility for generations. And so to lift oneself up by one's bootstraps into that stratum means that perhaps you want to hold on to it a bit more tightly than those for whom it's more of a normal thing. Sorry, I'm not expressing that very well, but you know what I mean. If you fight for something, then you tend to want to hold on to it because you remember what it was like not to have that thing. And when Alexander was hanged for his conspiratorial acts, or for being adjacent, however you want to put it, the town of Simbirsk, where they lived, basically ostracised the whole family. I'm going to have to let the cat in. And so you can imagine what that must have been like, having got yourself a decent place in society, having lifted yourself up, to then be ostracised. So having been ostracised from Simbirsk, I think Lenin grew up to become quite cynical of Tsarism, although he already was to some extent. He had a good education, he did well at school. He did eventually get into university. And so he was a learned man, and he became a political theoretician. He'd been reading the works of Marx and Engels, and perhaps I shouldn't be going into too much of his history because that's just regurgitating what's in the book. I should be telling you whether the book is any good or not. So, am I able to recite Lenin's history having just read this book? To some extent, yes. I could mention the basic timeline, but I think in order to be able to do that effectively, I would probably want to read it again because it's very, very detailed and deep. And by the time you get to the end of it, although his life was relatively short, I mean, what was he, in his early 50s when he died? 1924. By the time we get there, I've kind of forgotten a lot of his childhood because it's, 490 something pages? 494 pages in this particular copy. So it's a long book. And I would like to read it again. This one's from the library. So, local library. It's due back on 24th of February. So I want to get this video out now before I have to return the book. It's broken up into 4 sections. So I'll just tell you what they are. The Rebel Emerges, Section 1. Lenin and the Party, Section 2, which starts in the year 1900. Seizing Power, so that's us getting closer to the revolution, so we're in February 1917. And then Section 4, Defence of the Revolution, War Leader, 1918. So those are the 4 sections, and then there's a final one, Lenin the Afterlife, which is only 15 pages or so after Lenin's death. So it's not a spoiler, he did die, we all know that. So the large portion at the back is to do with his health, and it goes into how he dealt with Stalin and Trotsky and what was going on behind the scenes, but it doesn't really give us much detail on that. I mean, Stalin barely gets a mention, which is quite surprising given who he went on to become. So I would like to have had more about the relationship between Lenin and Stalin. I think that was kind of glaring by its omission. It was mentioned in part, the fact that they were at loggerheads at some points. What stands out to me is the man that Lenin was. He was able to stick to his guns with regards to his policy ideas, his ideology. And he was supportive of the use of violence in order to achieve those aims. And this is partly what caused the split between the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks. The Mensheviks were more in favour of building socialism through peaceful means, through progression, whereas Lenin wanted it to be more violent. And when the Tsar was brought down, the provisional government was put in place, Lenin was still in exile. And he was trying to work out how to bring about the violent change that he foresaw in his mind. But he had to stay away because the Ochrana, or the Ochrana in Tsarist times, before Tsar Nicholas was brought down, the secret police, the Tsarist secret police, they were after him. They were trying to catch him, put him away. And when the provisional government was in place and Lenin came back on the sealed train, he surprised everyone because he got off the train in Petrograd, as it was called then, and stood up on top of a vehicle and basically shouted down with the provisional government. And that was a surprise to a lot of people. That's one of the scenes that stands out in the book, actually, the way that Service describes that sealed train, that journey from Switzerland back to Russia. There's a lot of detail in there, and he talks of how the train itself, the fact that it was sealed, was a misnomer. It wasn't actually sealed. They were getting on and off and buying booze and fags and snacks and stuff. And at one point, Lenin and his wife, Nadezhda, were sitting in the compartment on the train, which they had on their own. Lenin was writing his April thesis, and next door there was a party going on, and that didn't go down well, so he tried to put a stop to it, and he didn't really manage to. But he did get them to quieten down, and he also got pieces of paper, basically, and made tickets for the toilets, because the revellers were going into the next carriage and into the toilets for a cigarette and causing big queues. So I thought that was quite an amusing little piece of information. Here's a funny wee section. See if this reminds you of the Judean People's Front from Life of Brian. Page 201. A Bolshevik gathering took place in Paris in December 1911, masquerading as a meeting of representatives of the entire party. The participants, led by Lenin, decided to replace the Foreign Organisational Commission with a committee of the Foreign Organisation. People's Front of Judea or Judean People's Front? Another feature of the book is photographs. It has a few sections of photographs which I quite enjoy looking at, particularly the one of Lenin when he shaved off his beard and moustache for his official document, which was used for his passport. That's a great photo. And I always feel that photographs in a historical book really help to bring it to life, to get to see the people who are being described in the book, see what they look like. I'd love to see some video. I'd love to see Lenin in action, standing up, giving speeches and things. There's a great picture there of the Rolls Royce that they had modified with caterpillar tracks on the back and skis on the front. Amazing. And the other section that stands out is in the Smolny Institute in Petrograd when the revolution was going down, when Lenin got back to Petrograd, and it talks of the meetings that took place during the revolution, and it goes into some details, which is, it's almost like being in the room. I really enjoyed that section of the book. So, in short, yes, I would recommend it. It's not enough for me to be able to talk with any kind of authority about Lenin's life. I could possibly talk more about the revolution in a much more coherent way than I would have been able to before I'd read this book. But that's not to say that I don't want to read more books. So I think what I'll do, instead of reading this again, I'll read something else that touches on the same timeline, and we'll get some other authors' takes on the revolution, because it's a period of time that fascinates me, It always has, and I've got a shelf behind me filled with books about Stalin in particular, but I think the revolution's something I'd like to read more of. So Anthony Beevor's book is one that I've got in my mind at the moment. I think it's called Russia. It's to do with the Civil War. And that's another thing, actually, that this book doesn't really go into much detail on. Of course, it mentions it, because it couldn't not. But it doesn't go into great detail about the Red Army versus the Whites. Not that I'm really looking for too much military detail, but I would like to have had a bit more of the politics that were going on. So that's another thing that I'd like to read more about. So Anthony Beevor's book is definitely one that's on my list. So I'll leave it there. How many stars am I going to give it? I'm going to give it 4, because it was so rich and detailed and informative, slow-paced, challenging to read. This particular copy has quite small text. That's just an observation. If it had bigger text, obviously, it would have had more pages, and it would then have been more unwieldy. So, yeah, it's just an observation. But yeah, slow-paced, deep, informative, challenging to read, but ultimately rewarding. So I'll leave it there. If you want to pick up a copy, I'll put a link down below. It'll be an affiliate link, probably, because that's how I want to roll, to try and help this channel to grow and make a few pennies of income if I can. I'll put a link to Amazon and to bookshops.org, so you can pick your poison there. And if you want to hear more about this, I'll build a playlist. So this will go into a playlist about history, Russia, Soviet history, something like that, in order that I can keep all of those books together in a playlist and keep them separate from my fantasy reads. Thanks for watching to the end. I really appreciate it. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.